Today's episode is sponsored by Ellie, Ellii.
Ellie is one of the world's leading content libraries for English language teachers, with thousands of ready-made lessons and flashcards and hundreds of videos that you can use to complement your own curriculum or use as your main source of materials.
Ellie is run by a team of former English teachers, dedicated to creating content that engages your language learners.
If you're an independent teacher or paying for your materials out of pocket, we invite you to use our podcast's exclusive discount code Think-Aloud to save 15% off your first membership term. That's THINKALOUD.
And if you're an administrator looking to buy for your whole program, just reach out to the fine folks at Ellie to inquire about a 2-month free trial to test it out for your organization. And don't forget to mention who sent you, your friends at the Teacher Think-Aloud Podcast.
Head to ellie.com today. That's ELLII.com. Hello, and welcome to the Teacher Think-Aloud Podcast, a podcast for reflective practice for teachers of English around the world. I'm your co-host, Anna.
And I'm Shay.
Today, we'll be looking under the hood of generative AI, so to speak, trying to get a sense of how it works and how to use AI to boost our ESL pedagogy and our skills as English language teachers. But before we get into that, we want to share with you an exclusive opportunity to get featured on our podcast.
Yes, it's that time of the year, folks. The time for us to start putting together our annual Friends of the Podcast episode, in which we feature voices from teachers around the world on a special video episode. We actually skipped a year last year. Fun fact.
Yeah, life stuff got in the way last year.
Yeah, having a baby will do that to you. I guess, yeah.
Yeah, but now that I'm getting a bit more sleep, we're ready to bring back our Friends of the Podcast episode. And this year, we're asking you to come back to basics and reflect on what areas you want to work on in your teaching practice. From something as big as honing your AI skills or refreshing your curriculum to include environmental themes, to the everyday language teaching dilemmas, such as classroom management or teaching vocabulary.
To get featured on the episode, go to, here we go, bit.ly/backtobasics26, listen to the prompt, and record your audio response with one easy click. We want to hear from you.
We do. So pause now, record your reflection, and come back to the episode. You can find the link in the show notes. And here it is one more time, bit.ly/backtobasics26.
Okay, are we pausing?
No. Our listeners are pausing.
Right. Okay, well, listeners, we trust that you've done your reflection, so here we are again. So, as Anna mentioned, today we're digging into the history of AI, some key terms and concepts, and frameworks and tips for teachers to use AI ethically in their classrooms. Now, many of you have likely started using AI for personal or professional use, but...
Or maybe you haven't.
And that's okay. Absolutely. But it's important for all of us to be AI literate in today's world. And part of being AI literate is having an understanding of how it works and having a robust framework to work from.
And we had just the person to talk about all of this. Someone who's been diving deep into AI in the last few years. Let's meet our guest, Sara.
My name is Sara Davila. I mostly go by she, her pronouns. I am a learning alchemist. That is my favorite little title for myself. And what I like to do is take research and theory and actually turn that into practical practice for educators in the classroom. I read all of that research so you don't have to, but then I actually show you how to make it useful for you and for your students.
And I would like to just describe the scene for our listeners here because we also have an additional special guest. Sarah's lovely dog, Bear, is in her Zoom screen right now, and we are just enjoying his presence as there is a thunderstorm outside. So thanks for your introduction, Sara. If you've listened to our episodes, you might know that we have a little surprise icebreaker question. So our question for you today is, You're someone who spends a lot of time researching and playing with new tools, but we all need to disconnect sometimes. So, what do you like to do when you need a break from screens?
I am obsessed with hammocks. It's actually a verb for me. We're going to hammock. Now it's hammock time. We're hammocking.
I
So
love that.
I own too many hammocks. So I live in a hammock when I'm camping, and I have my favorite hammock is a hammock that sits on my porch. It's a swing seat hammock that you can
Oh.
sit in. It's like a chair. You kick your feet out. And it's like a lounger, but it's also a hammock. That's my favorite way to take a break, is to just hang out in my hammock, read a book. It's not super exciting, but it's hammock life.
That's
Oh,
super exciting to me.
that's just the best answer. You were like, yeah, I know how to answer this question. Didn't have to think. Just yes, hammocking, great.
Awesome. Thanks, Sarah. That was great. Well, so let's talk a little bit about what we came here to talk about today, which is LLMs and
Mhm.
how teachers can benefit from using them. So I hope you can start us off
M&Ms,
by
you can eat
M&Ms.
M&Ms, you can,
Yep.
they're different. No,
Did I
not
say
M&Ms.
M&Ms?
I said LLMs.
It's like, oh crap.
But
I
you know
do
what?
things
They
like that
are as fun.
sometimes.
LLMs are just as much fun as M&Ms. So
Yes.
yeah,
Right.
yeah.
Well, if you understand them. So Sarah's here to help us with that. So can you give us a brief overview of what large language models, or LLMs, are and how they came to be? And with that, you can touch a little bit on maybe their historical development for our listeners.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting when we're looking at this. So LLM, a large language model, for those of you who don't know that term, it means generative AI. So when we're talking about Chat GPT, when we're talking about Gemini or Google AI, as some people might call it, we're really talking about these large language models, right? So these models, it's an interesting history. AI did not just suddenly jump out of a box on November 2022, although it seems that way. It's just they open this huge box and now suddenly AI, it's just sort of everywhere. Hard to believe that was barely 3 years ago. We're talking about 2.5 years ago
Crazy.
was the public release of GPT. So we've been researching models for intelligence for almost 75 years. The first conception of AI came about in a conference that was happening in the 1950s when they were talking about intelligent machines and intelligent machine design. So it's really, how do we build a machine that has human intelligence? And that's kind of the background of where all of this came from. So fast forward, as you're doing this, we have different levels of learning. The first type would be machine learning, which many of us are very familiar with, and you may not know it. So machine learning that you use every day. When was the last time you had a lot of spam in your inbox? Thanks to machine learning, a junk mail filter was born. So that's like, we've been using those now since basically you started using your email. So it's just how ubiquitous this is. So as these models continued to be developed, we went from those basic models, machine learning, you can do little things, to what we call deep learning models. And this is where we really started to get into natural language processing. Dragon, naturally speaking, it was one of the first big public natural language processing models. It was popular because it integrated into Microsoft Word back in 2008, and it allowed you to do natural dictation and you could write with it. Fun fact, Terry Pratchett, who is a very well-known science fiction author, as he got older, lost a lot of mobility in his hands. And he was a user of Dragon, naturally speaking. It was how he wrote the last books that he was writing. He actually spoke those out loud. So I love the accessibility piece. It's like one of the best pieces of AI. So Dragon was one of the first really big engines. They trained this on huge data sets. One of the things with AI is these massive data sets. And they're collecting all of these words, and these words go into data banks. So just imagine having thousands and thousands of spreadsheets. All of those spreadsheets then had to be digitally coded to create essentially these huge coded spreadsheets. So now we have like this flat panel of words, and we want to do something with it. And so this is where deep learning kind of like pushes the edge, where we get into that LLM territory, is you start to stack up all of this information we have of how words work, how they work together. And now we can use them to predict. We can use them to predict, based on some words, what other words might come next. And kind of a fun way to think of it is, you think of your spreadsheets, turn all of those spreadsheets into a massive sandwich, or instead of a sandwich, perhaps a Rubik's Cube. And so whenever you're asking a prompt, these LLMs are like turning the dial on all of these Rubik's Cube words that they have to kind of output this information. So it's these massive databases. They're pulling from huge amounts of information and using the prompt that you give it to predict what you want to have come next. And so essentially from that history, it's like we get to just basically having a database of all of the words to then making that functional. And that is essentially where we're at now, is functional large language models.
Well, you're making me think of, corpus linguistics when you talk about deep learning. I mean, I feel like that intersects quite a bit, right?
Oh, absolutely. So all of that work we were doing in corpus linguistics back in, 2008, I saw a lot of teachers start doing their own corpus work and training models with Wordsmith, the COCA, of course, the Corpus of American Linguistics. And there's the British National Corpus as well. All of these inform that data set essentially that has become the large language models that we see today.
Okay. Well, so how did we get then to generative AI, and how is generative AI different from these deep learning models that you've been talking about?
So with the deep learning models, these are primarily algorithms. They're programmed, highly specific. The output has to be very obvious, right? So to get to something else, we actually had to transform all of that data. This is why ChatGPT is exciting as it is. So GPT actually stands for something, and it means generative pre-trained transformer. The transformer is essentially the brain. This is what allows us to find patterns inside of that language, which is what allows these models to look at a prompt, understand the pattern that you're looking for, and utilize that in order to give you output or the information, that content that it generates for you. And it's also why prompt engineering becomes such an important thing, because with this transformer model, it only works if it fully understands what it needs to predict for you based on the prompt that you have given. And we can go down a wild rabbit hole of prompt engineering, but essentially that the more context that you can give your prompt, the better it can predict what it is that you're looking for, the specific area in which you work, in which that output will be appropriate, and then it can get you to that output. And so that's essentially what they did, is they took these deep learning models, added in a lot of this ability to transform, looking at a lot of neurolinguistics to create these really high-end databases that just output all of this information and bring all of that together for you.
Sarah, I think you've distilled it in a way that is accessible for teachers. I know you often have metaphors and other sort of simpler ways of defining things. So is there anything you want to add?
One of the easiest ways to understand this is just really understanding what AI does as a model. So for example, if I gave you a sentence like the cat sat on the, what goes in the blank? What follows the in the sentence? So if you had to
So
put
many
some
things.
words in it.
Cats sit on everything. That's a tough one.
The lap, the couch,
The
the windowsill, the box. Where's the weirdest place my
all
cat
the
has
lap.
had? Yeah, I don't know.
Oh, so that
We're
is an
bad LLMs.
interesting thing. Is it's like about AI, right? So how does it get to this answer? So the cat sat on the blank is a really good example of the challenge here. In order for a model to work, it has to figure out what goes in the blank, right? And so what these models are doing and what they've been trained to do is to essentially predict that. Now, what's really fun about these models and how they're built is perplexity. And I'm not talking about perplexity AI. I'm talking about perplexity as the word. And as English teachers, what is the definition of perplexity? Or to be perplexed?
Being confounded.
Yeah.
Surprised is another way to say that. So with these AI models, so they train these data sets to make predictions. And the predictions mean that when the transformer model is calling from the data, it has to understand what answers are potentially possible to fill in the blank in the cat sat on the. And what's interesting is the more possibilities there are, the harder it is for these models to predict what it is that they have to do. And so this is where transformer models are really interesting, is they can take context, they can take information from the user that they glean from your experience and put all of that together to predict what needs to be done in order to give you that output or that text.
I mean, if I were to translate your translation of this very complex, right, like model, it's that the difference maybe between Gen AI, as we think of it now, versus previous forms of AI, is really that it's able to not just fill in the blank, but also draw from the broader context in which the sentence, the whatever it is that you're working on, takes place, right? And the more you feed it about that context, the more it's able to fill in that blank accurately, right?
Exactly. So if you think back to all of the colloquy activities that you have probably done in your entire lifetime, understanding collocates, we teach English language learners to look at collocates to help understand what people are talking about. So
Yeah.
very, very similar. It's like training these models to just understand from communication and from speech how people talk about things and then what will come essentially next, right? And perplexity in the context of AI literally means the number of potential possible solutions to any situation that it's given. And a lower number of perplexity means that the output you'll get from the model will be better and it will be closer to what you're looking for. The higher the number of possibilities, the weirder it can be.
Yeah.
And so when we saw those models start coming out in the early days in 2022, that content was so consistent. They hadn't trained at scale. They had been doing these smaller experiments. GPT actually launched to the public back in 2010. So it had been available for almost 15 years. But from 2010 through to 2022, as they were going through GPT 1, 2, and 3, you had to pay for credits. So there were a very small number of users who were using it at the time. What made 2022 as exciting is they felt that at that point, it had gotten to a level of robustness that it was ready for public use, that it wouldn't be too perplexed by potential users, that it would be able to be stable. What these models are capable of doing with language is something that human beings are also capable of doing. If we're having a conversation, we have the context, we understand the human being who is next to us. Maybe we know their backstory and their life and what they've done and how they hang out. And so when they're talking to us, our brains interpret all of that information and we can understand what's going on. This is actually really an incredible leap forward with AI, is that now it has that same ability to take just a little bit of information, put that information in context, and then begin to understand what you're talking about. Whereas with our old machine learning models or our deep learning models, you just like ask it how you're doing today and it just breaks. With ChatGPT, it will give you an answer and it will keep going until it tries to figure out what you really want to talk about. And so I think that's kind of the big evolution.
Yeah. Okay, that was a lot of information.
Yeah, Sarah just got into some really complex information about the history of AI and how generative AI works. But she did a really good job, I think, of breaking everything down. These are some hefty concepts.
So maybe a little recap?
Yes, a recap. And I also want to fill in a few gaps here and there with things I've learned the past few years, too.
Okay. So in terms of history, let's start with AI is not new.
Nope, not new, right? The 1950s is when the term artificial intelligence was coined. And Sarah really focused on the precursor to generative AI, machine learning. Machine learning really went into full swing in the 1990s and early 2000s and is the cornerstone of many of the applications we've become accustomed to, such as autocomplete, for example.
Well, then Sarah also used the term deep learning. And from what I understand, deep learning is a subset of machine learning that aims to simulate what the human brain does, connecting layers and layers of data to solve complex problems. It's what allows for image and speech recognition.
Right. And the important point about deep learning and machine learning is that they're good at making pretty narrow predictions from a specific data set. We can categorize these actually as predictive AI, whereas generative AI, the AI that's really in full swing today, is really meant to generate, to create new content.
And Sarah briefly mentioned the term transformer, which is actually part of the name ChatGPT. Chat Generative Pre-trained Transformer, ChatGPT. And so the technology that has really allowed this step into the world of Gen AI are transformers. And the important point here is that transformers look beyond the word for word and have a deeper understanding of context across bigger chunks of text.
Listeners, if you're feeling a bit lost, don't worry. The point here, it's not to master these concepts, but to get a sense of what all of this is so we can be more informed users of AI tools.
And if you want to dig deeper into these key terms and history, we've added some links for you in the show notes to get you started on some self-study. Let's get back to our conversation.
It's really amazing to think of how far we've come. As teachers, we're confronted with this technology, and it's really hard to know where to start with that, right? There's just so much background knowledge and so much unknown about entering this space. Even if we've been playing with it for a while, it's really helpful to know that context. It's also really helpful to have some kind of framework to start from. Are there any frameworks that can help teachers wrap their head around LLMs and help them support their own professional development around Gen AI?
Yeah, I think right now, the biggest challenge we have with AI is one, it's everywhere, which means it's also in the hands of our students. I feel like when generative AI hit the scene, it was probably very similar in the English language education community to what happened when Google Translate became available. So
Yeah.
if you remember that, and suddenly it's like, oh, I'm just grading Google Translate homework. And so as educators, we have knee-jerk reactions to things. Change is hard. And the first thing that we want to go is like, well, how do we avoid this? How do we stop it? How do we prevent it? And that's not going to work. That's completely impossible. So what do we do? And this is where having a framework or a frame of reference is really useful. The biggest challenge that we have right now as educators working in an AI-driven world is that these models are not going to stop changing. They're not going to stop evolving. They're not going to stop getting better. And they are not going to stay the same. I have no idea what AI looks like in even 6 months. I literally can't tell you what it will be able to do. So how do you even have a framework for something that is so rapidly changing, so rapidly evolving? And how do you keep up with that? So the framework that I have been using and the one that I recommend teachers consider using is based on UNESCO's framework for artificial intelligence for teachers. And they have done a beautiful job. I like this because it's a global framework. It isn't from one single country. They're not taking into consideration only the needs of one group of educators or one type of educators. It outlines competencies or essentially lenses from which we can view how we use AI in the classroom. It's also flexible, so it can travel with us as AI changes and as it evolves. And the framework, it's quite simple. It has essentially 5 key areas of competency. The first one is human-centered. And essentially what this means is that AI, and this is the most important thing to remember, AI is a tool created by human beings to be used by human beings for the improvement of human beings. It's not about replacing humans. This is something that's here to help us. And I love that human-centered frame because one of the pieces there is use human-centered whenever you hear the hype. AI is going to take away all the teacher jobs or all of the doctor jobs. It's like, well, that's a lot of hype. That's not human-centered. That's not what AI is supposed to do. So it's very grounding. The next framework is ethics. What is the ethics of AI and what does that look like? And for educators, this is very simple. You as the teacher are always responsible for what the AI does. It's a very simple formula, but it helps us think that if I'm going to take something into the classroom, if I'm going to make content with AI, if I'm going to have my students use AI, I am responsible for what happens there. And so now I actually have to think through what could potentially happen. I'll give you a quick example. Imagine you're in a classroom right now with, let's say, 30 children, as is often the case. Many of us are working in overcrowded classrooms, and you suddenly bring in a guest who will answer any question the children ask, no matter what it is.
Ooh.
Hello, Gen AI.
Scary.
Yeah.
And let's have talks with parents later that evening after the children have asked any question that comes to mind. This is actually a real story. A teacher was talking about this. She brought ChatGPT unfettered into her classroom to teach her students writing. She went in to check on one of the groups and found out that they were having a conversation that she never would have authorized. And then she suddenly realized that all of her students had suddenly gone off of the writing assignment because they just found an adult friend that will tell them anything.
And they're quick to
And
figure that one out. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
The other parts of the framework are great as well. The foundations and techniques. As educators, we should understand how AI works. We should never accept that I don't know how it did this. We should always push. We should always ask, always play. That's my biggest advice to educators. If something comes out, play with it. That's useful. And the final two, very relevant to teachers. One is AI pedagogy, understanding what the pedagogy of AI is. You have to define that for your students, for your classroom, what's acceptable, where you're using it. And then finally, professional development. And not just taking somebody's course to learn how their AI application works, but thinking, how can I use AI to help me develop professionally as a teacher? And then how can I teach others what I'm learning about AI so they can benefit and bring that into their classroom? So that is the framework that I recommend. It's quite comprehensive. And again, it's something that can travel with us. It gives us something to at least be prepared for and a way to ask questions. There is a lot of AI hype, and we as educators are going to see a million different types of tools coming into the classroom.
Yeah, I think any teacher working to integrate AI into their instruction needs to be thinking about all of these different components, all of these elements. There's so much foundational work to do. And I think a lot of people hesitate to even get into it because it does seem a little bit unattainable. It's like this lofty goal. One day I'll be an AI enhanced educator. So I think having that sort of framework to work with is a great starting point for educators. I'm all about frameworks. So now that we have the foundation here, let's talk about some use cases. There are always these new tools cropping up, and I think people feel a bit bombarded. So what are some practical and impactful use cases you would recommend?
Yeah. So one of the first things that I recommend teachers do, if you are a teacher like I am, I've been in the field now for 20 plus years, you probably have a computer. If I looked at your desktop, I would see 1,000 files on that desktop. Some of them maybe from 10 years ago of worksheets that you created and have saved, and it's right there on your desktop. So one of the best use cases of AI is none of us have the time to actually go back into those files that maybe we created really early in our career, or it could be last year, right? What I love about AI is you can take that old content, and this is where I recommend starting, upload a file and tell AI that you would like to update this for 2025. That's it. That's the whole prompt. Here's an activity I created for my students. Give it a little information. Maybe they were my students in Thailand that I worked with, in 2005. This was the objective. I'd like to reimagine this for 2025. And what's going to happen is AI will update it for you. It will give you a 2025 version of that. ChatGPT is great for this. Gemini is phenomenal. Cloud will do a great job for this. They're all really good. And what's really interesting, though, is because the output you're getting is based on something that you did, you think a lot more critically about what you're seeing. And that is really going to help you start to understand what AI is good for and what it's not good for, because you'll immediately start to recognize its limitations when you're looking at it as an assistant who's trying to help you transform your past work. It's been absolutely one of the biggest learnings I've had with AI myself, is that when I work with my personal content as the starting point, everything changes with how I'm using the tool.
What I love about that, Sarah, is, teachers who are new to using AI can feel that intimidation about prompt engineering. There is really a science to it, and maybe they don't have time to take a webinar or read a lot of articles about it. So giving it that sort of training and saying, you are my assistant, here's how I operate. I think that's a really great starting point for teachers who are maybe insecure about their abilities there.
Well, the human is the model then, right? It's human-centered. So that's smart. Tying back to that framework.
I've had some courses where we've done this, and I actually said, AI is your personal assistant. And for some of the teachers that I work with, they just start laughing like, I've never had a personal assistant before. I have 60 kids to teach. Nobody gives me an assistant. So really, you do have to think of it as kind of a personal assistant. Ask it to do little tasks like, refresh my lesson plan. Can you help me add a differentiated activity to this very specific lesson? You're going to think a lot more about the content you get. It will be a lot more useful. But just like an assistant, you can also unbox it from there. So for example, something that I might do is give AI my schedule for the month. Like, I have 3 classes on Monday, 2 on Wednesday, 4 on Thursday. So I've got all of that information. So one of the first things that I started with GPT that was super useful I'd upload my schedule and I would say, can you convert this for a Google Calendar as a downloadable file that I can import into my calendar to block that time out for the rest of the semester that I'm teaching? Add the name of the class, the time that it's going to be at, the room that it's in, put it in the ChatGPT. 2 seconds later, it will have all of this done. It will give you the export file as a CSV file, download it to computer, upload it into Google, and there you go. Your calendar is now plotted out for that class,
Oh, I
all
love that.
done in seconds, and it's just there. It's like having a personal assistant. Now you have a personal assistant and it's named ChatGPT. I love that.
That's nice. I've never thought of doing that before, Sarah. And I play with ChatGPT and other tools a lot. But I'm thinking not only when it comes to scheduling your courses and the titles, but what about the prep time and how much time should I block out for grading? And you feed it into GPT and it creates that space for you as well.
Actually, fun fact, Shay, I did a research project and I knew it was a 6-month project. So I went to AI. I told it what I was researching. I gave it my objective. I told it what I wanted to do. I said, I want to be able to dedicate 1 hour a day to this, 3 days a week. And this is the time block where I want it. I actually asked GPT, like, this is essentially what I'm working towards. So for each time block, can you tell me what I should be doing? And it
Backwards
literally set up the
engineering.
objective
Yeah.
for me in the description. And then when I was going, that block came up, I was like, oh, what am I? Oh, right. That's where I'm at. And then I would just go through and do it. And this got me through my entire research project. So it kept me on track for
Yep.
6 months.
Right.
And it's a busy person. That's easy to lose that time.
Yeah, and you
it's a
might
major
not.
time suck, right? Like
Yeah.
thinking, oh, when am I going to do this? And just thinking through
Yeah, the
logistics.
project management of it.
Yep.
Yeah. And I mean,
Yep.
you might not end up doing exactly what it's telling you to do in that moment
Mhm.
because you're the person who's in charge. You know much more about it, but at least you have a
Yep.
foundation to start from.
I love how practical these use cases are.
Mm-hmm.
And, we just discussed this in our latest episode, our collaboration with Diesel, episode 74, where we were talking about tech tools for supporting reflective practice and for building it into our routines. And one thing we talked about was setting calendar reminders with questions for reflection and the like.
Mm-hmm.
And using AI for that just seems like such a great time saver.
Yeah, that's exactly the kind of thing Sarah's tip really would support well.
Uh-huh.
We could tell AI how often we want to reflect, what areas we're working on, and it could build in some calendar reminders with perhaps a question for reflection for us to ponder for a few minutes whenever we see the notification pop up on our phones.
Right. We're making reflection just a little less labor intensive and a little more fruitful.
Yes. And in the same vein, I think it's worth highlighting here just how helpful frameworks can be to support thoughtful AI integration.
Absolutely. We had a really great audience contribution from Instagram user edulab.pub. We don't know who you are, but thanks for commenting. Well, they commented that they too have used AI because it's the shiny new thing to make a custom GPT for a personalized review of grammar. But they also commented that the custom GPT doesn't always work perfectly, that it doesn't have the authenticity that you get from something designed by a human.
Right. It's important to recognize that there is a lot of hype around AI and not to lose sight of the human side of teaching.
So true. So I really liked the UNESCO framework Sarah went through. Maybe we can do a little recap here so we can hear those competencies she described all in one clean list.
Sure. So, UNESCO's framework for AI competencies for teachers outlines 15 competencies across 5 dimensions. And those dimensions are 1, human-centered mindset, 2, ethics of AI, 3, AI foundations and applications, 4, AI pedagogy, and 5, AI for professional learning.
I appreciate how flexible that framework is. And, if that one doesn't float your boat, we also recommend checking out TESOL's technology standards and also ISTE's standards for teachers. Both of these frameworks are really just as flexible and well-established and focus on teachers integrating technology more broadly into their practice.
Right. And these standards are all just a starting point. We wanted to get a sense of where teachers can go to beef up their AI skill set.
Great. Well, yeah, our final question for you is all about teachers developing their skill set and practicing using these tools and getting comfortable with, generative AI more generally. Where can they start?
So the first thing I recommend for educators is look at your school. Are you a Microsoft school? Are you a Google school? If you're neither, even better. But if you are in one of those ecosystems, take a look at what you have access to. If you are in a Microsoft ecosystem, there's a very good possibility you already have access to Copilot. Microsoft Copilot is their embedded model. Embedded AI is a whole other thing that's happening. And that's where they're taking these models and putting them into tools we use all of the time, like Word or Google Sheets. So if you're an educator in the Microsoft system, check out and see if you have access to Copilot. If you are in a Google school system, very, very likely you have access now to Gemini and also the Gemini for Education suite that they just launched. And the reason I say check with your schools first, fun fact, if you have access to this through your schools, then it means that that AI is covered by your institution's security policies, which means that your data is safe. So if you want to look at things like, say, a grade book that you have with your students and you have Copilot through your school, then now you can actually do that safely. You don't have to worry about data privacy or data being leaked because it's covered by your policy. Same thing is true with Gemini, which is Google for Education. So if you're a safety concern, a privacy concern, which we as educators should be, that's a great place to start. And just play around with them. Like what I do is go in on the weekend. What is something that you've been wanting to do forever? Go in and see how AI can help you. I literally had a class this week where I taught 100 educators based in Panama, Costa Rica, Tajikistan, how to build apps. I have watched teachers in Uzbekistan who were afraid of AI on Monday literally create vocabulary apps that had pronunciation features, would allow students to look at pictures, allow students to get feedback on writing sentences in real time. So really just go in and play with it. If there's anything you've ever wanted to do technologically, build a website, create an application, learn how to improve your writing, and learn a new language. Like these models are really great for that. They're a lot of fun to play with. And I also recommend not to pay for anything until you've had a chance to play around with it. All of these models are exciting, but before you really put money into it, take some time to invest in just playing around, seeing what they can do, and dreaming through it. I think one of my other favorite kind of play use cases is having AI schedule like a dream trip. You may have heard about this. Like I use AI to plan my vacation. It was the best ever. Have AI plan your Friday night in your city. This is a very small, but you will be surprised at how much is going on where you live. And AI will find all of these great things that you would love to do that you've never heard of. And it can just be a really great tour guide for your hometown. So just go in, play with it, see what can happen, see what it can do. If you are in a Microsoft or Google school, definitely check out those models. Otherwise, check out the frontier models, which are ChatGPT, Gemini, Claude by Anthropic. And then you can start playing with some of the other applications that are built on these frontier models. And that's where you get things like Perplexity or like Notebook LLM, which became very popular. I do like to encourage people to start with the frontier models first. Once you understand what those can do, all of these things built on top of them make more sense when you use them as well.
I love it. It's like skill transfer, right? What you're getting from learning how to prompt properly on ChatGPT, you can transfer over to your work in Perplexity, for example, or your work with Notebook LM.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, get your hands dirty, have fun. And I love that a piece of your advice there was to start from like a personal use of it, because I think that makes it so much less daunting. Start from something that brings you
Lower
joy,
stakes.
lower stakes, exactly. And then, that'll help you learn this tool and help you, get what you need from these tools when it comes to something teaching related.
Yeah. It makes you feel less replaceable. I think if there's any fear that all of us have as educators right now, it's that AI is going to replace us. When you take an old worksheet and you say, AI, can you modernize this for me? And then you look at what it gives you and like, oh no, I could never use this in my class.
Yeah, we're not there yet.
But it does. It gives you that confidence boost that, oh, actually, I'm smarter than this AI. And I feel like that's something that we need to remember is at the end of the day, the AI is not smarter than we are. We have so much of a more robust knowledge of how the world works. When it comes to learning, we know our students. We know their loves, their hopes, their dreams, their wishes, their parents, their families, their goals. It's never going to be able to do that work the same way that a human is. So start
Mhm.
with what you know, go into it with your own work first, and you're always going to feel more confident when you're using these models as you go forward.
Lovely. That
Mm.
was such great advice to cap off the episode.
Right. And if starting with an LLM chatbot still sounds daunting, there are many, many resources out there to get teachers started with prompt engineering. We've linked a bunch of goodies in the show notes.
Yeah, check them out. And of course, we want to end this episode with a little reflection, as usual.
Mm-hmm.
How have you used LLMs so far to support your personal projects and ESL pedagogy? How have you used generative AI for English language teaching?
If you found this episode helpful or inspiring, please share it with a friend or colleague, or leave us a review wherever you get your podcasts.
Don't forget to follow us on your platform of choice. And we hope you'll consider contributing to our upcoming Friends of the Podcast episode. Leave us a voice memo at bit.ly/backtobasics26.
Thanks so much for joining us on the Teacher Think-Aloud podcast. And until next time, friends, happy teaching.
And happy reflecting.